shortages. You all have done an amazing job, and we appreciate all your hard work and commitment to your communities. Now it's time to look forward and to begin to reimagine life on Main Street. Our hope is that this conference provides some tools to help you create a climate of confidence in your downtown. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our first two speakers, Alan Pullman and Shannon Heffernan, both of Studio 111. If you have questions for them or any of our speakers today, please feel free to enter them in the chat. Alan is the founder and senior principal at Studio 111, leading the design and integration of the firm's architecture and urban design work. He is a licensed architect with more than 20 years experience. He is currently serving as the chair of the Downtown Long Beach Associates Board and is a member of the Urban Land Institute's Urban Revitalization Council. He was awarded a Master of Science in Cities degree from the London School of Economics and Political Science and a Bachelor of Architecture degree from Syracuse University. Shannon is Studio 111's Urban Design Director and leads the urban design practice, which is focused on the revitalization and transformation of cities. Shannon has a Bachelor of Science degree from California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo in City and Regional Planning, and is also currently pursuing an Executive Master in Urban Planning from USC Sol Price School of Public Policy. Thank you, Alan and Shannon, for joining us today. Alan, I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, great. And there's Shannon too. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's great to see everyone, well, virtually. I wish we could be there in person. Maybe if we do a decent job, you'll invite us back next year. We're really excited, and we can see you in person. We'd love to make that trip to New Mexico. We're going to go through a little presentation. Let's see. I can share, and thank you for that great introduction. I appreciate it. Let me just see if I can pull up my screen here. Working on it.
Yeah, I can see it.
Is it showing up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, funny. I don't see it. But if you can see it, do you see that picture of us, Shannon?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Just give us a thumbs up if you guys could see it too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
All right, good. So we called this talk Trends and Tactics for Vibrant Streets. And we wanted to, and thank you, William, for inviting us. We were going to really talk about what creating vibrant streets is all about. An outline of our presentation, we have like 5 little segments to talk about. A lot of the ideas we're going to talk about aren't new. You probably know them already. Many of them you've probably implemented yourselves. But we're going to discuss them from our perspective and our experiences, both pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. Hopefully, you'll find something interesting in what we have to say. We want to also hear from you. So as Julie mentioned earlier, if you could, use the chat, that would be fantastic. And we'd love to make this as interactive as possible. So before we get into the presentation, I'm going to just talk a little bit, about our firm. Our firm is Studio 111. I'm the founder. This is a picture of our actual office. Our office is located in downtown Long Beach in California. Our office is actually located in a vacant store that we decided we wanted to move into. And it's a picture of our office. We actually painted our mission statement above our front door so that we knew what we were about every day as we came to work, creating more livable, sustainable, and engaging cities. We do a lot of different kind of work, from affordable housing to community centers, community hubs, and food halls, to retail and office. But our start really was in corridor revitalization projects, especially in corridors that were underserved in and around Southern California. And so that's really why this is a topic that's really exciting to us and important to us, and we're passionate about, really is the formation of our studio around really revitalizing communities. And with the work that we've done over the last 20 years, I think we came up with our own sort of philosophy about public realm design. And that really came about, again, working with so many different communities and stakeholders, and some of the kind of criteria, some of the values we have around design go to the public realm as co-creation and local capacity building. So as designers, sometimes designers think we come in and we'll do the design, and we don't think that way. We want to facilitate the design, and the design is definitely often comes from the community. And at the best, it's a co-creation of many different stakeholders, creating vibrant streets. We've really come to see the value of incremental and flexible frameworks that build on existing assets and build slowly and incrementally over time, so that you can course correct and you kind of keep what's really special about a community. We call it place specific. Fundamentally, we don't think there's a one size fits all strategy for any great street, and it really needs to be developed with the context in mind. And then lastly, we always really value the importance of programming and ongoing operations. We don't think you design it and build it and they will come. I think great streets, great places really need an ongoing reason for people to come, not just great split place or design. So there's really importance in programming, ongoing operations and funding of that programming, and ongoing operations and keeping it fresh and exciting. So those are some of our philosophies when it comes to designing creating great places and great streets. All right, so I actually wanted to launch a poll, and I'm not sure if we do that or if it could be done. Oh, there it is. Great.
Yeah.
That was fast. That was very seamless. We just want to understand who we're talking to today. I know I've been on the New Mexico Main Street website, and I think I've visited every one of the website pages for all the different organizations, which is great. And I saw just a really variety of different kind of places. So numbers are still coming in here. Wait another second. There's such a variety of main streets in New Mexico that all look so interesting and different. And I know that not just Main Street organizations, but also arts organizations, historic districts as well. Great. So most of the main streets we're talking to today are rural. And then there's a mix of suburban and urban. Great. Thanks for sharing that. I don't know, can you see those results? Are they showing up on the screen? Yes, great, thank you. Okay, I have one more poll, which is, what are your main challenges in terms of placemaking? We had 3 kind of prompts there, as well as other, which I think you could type into the chat. And I'm going to open up another window. I can't quite see the chat the way my screen is set up. Shannon, can you see the chat at the moment?
I can't see the chat, but I could see the poll. And
okay,
I could also kind of walk through the voting results, Alan, if that's helpful.
Okay. No, I think that's great. Maybe William, can you see the chat?
I can. Yeah, I can see it. I'm supposed to be moderating, so I'll ask you. I'll let you know if there's any questions.
Okay, that would be fantastic.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think right now for this poll, we're getting a lot of votes for funding for improvements, which is, you know, certainly a challenge, especially during the pandemic, where bids have lost parking revenue as a result. And so finding funding has been challenging, and we will be talking about ways to be resourceful during this time. There's also
I think funding for improvements, it was a challenge before the pandemic as well.
That's very true, yes. We also, Alan, have a couple comments in the poll. One is building maintenance enforcement. We do talk a little bit, or I could talk a little bit about that related to like establishing MOU agreements. Parquitos, that's a fun term.
That's great.
Yeah. We actually haven't heard that term. I like that.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to learn a lot today. Okay, so it looks like, again, funding for improvements, we thought that would be number one, and it certainly was. And a lot of the other things, we'll hear some of the other topics, but lack of buy-in, common goals, we see that a lot. And one of our jobs is always to try to create consensus. And the other policy and process roadblocks, which also is an issue that we see a lot as well. Great. Thank you for responding. One of the words that we're going to throw around a lot today is placemaking. And everyone has probably heard that term. I Googled it. There's so many different definitions of what it is. So I'm just going to kind of share one that I like and that we could use for today's discussion. This comes from a friend of mine, Ryan Smolar, who runs the usplacemaking.org organization, which you could check out. It's really interesting, a lot of resources. And he defines it as people working together to make their communities' public spaces more social, connected, healthy, meaningful, prosperous, and happy. And I like that because it puts people at the center of placemaking. So that's sort of a definition that we've kind of adopted when we talk about placemaking as an effort. And it really isn't just about design. It includes business, communications, so many other facets that make a great place. So I thought we could just put some pictures to the words about placemaking. And Shannon has put together some of these images about what makes a great place. And I thought we could share a couple of images right now.
Yeah, and I just want to also mention, kind of building on Alan's point, placemaking is not only the physical improvements that are in the ground, but also the programming and giving people a reason to come and a reason to stay. And all of the great places that we've worked on or seen through our work all have similar ingredients that we wanted to share with you before we dive into some of our placemaking tactics that we're going to present today. So one of the first key ingredients is seating, and there's ways to be incredibly creative about it. Philadelphia has these floating style chaise lounge chairs. San Francisco provides more bench-like seating in their parklets. There's also art. So there's opportunities to incorporate art on the main streets. There's surface art like murals to add pops of color, and also an opportunity to engage local artists in your community. And then there's also programming. There's ways to activate the street during the weekday. What we have been seeing during the pandemic is actually involving local businesses that provide exercise classes where they could do outdoor yoga or Tai Chi or karate, or even having elements of programming to provide performances during the weekend. And then Alan, do you want to change to the next slide? So again, one of the things that we've also been seeing during the pandemic in relation to seating is having movable or flexible seating. But there are really opportunities to, make seating fun and to create destinations within your main street through, various types of seating. Another key element, certainly this will be a key component in New Mexico, is the importance of shade. And the center image provides a really creative example of how to apply shade to a main street. This example provides a sense of enclosure, making the street feel more like an outdoor room, but you could also provide more traditional arrangements or of shade through umbrellas or even storefront awnings to provide shade to your main street. The image to the upper right is another example of art. Art can be murals, but it could also be sculptural elements that are relatively iconic in a sense, something that's bold, that will stand out and can serve as a landmark or certainly a recognizable element of your street. And the bottom image is another example of programming. It could be games like ping pong, like Giant Connect 4, cornhole, and just other activities to attract people. Programming could also mean adding music to your street. So having buskers or a series of buskers to provide ambient music. Then Alan, do you want to go to the next slide, please? Another ingredient that is really fantastic to make your streets more fun and vibrant is adding pops of color. So the upper image on the left is a something that the city of Los Angeles is doing, and they are creating streetlets. And this is where you close down a portion of your street and you turn it into a plaza space. You apply unique surface graphics, with a couple cans of paint. And this really indicates that the space is for people and not for vehicles. And so this is, a fun way to add a pop of color, but also to take back that street for pedestrians and not cars. There are another couple of examples of shade elements, looking at overhead canopies spanning the street. This is something that could be temporary in nature during the summer months within your city, but they do require some existing infrastructure, having some overhead canopy cables that are fixed to light poles or fixed to the building would be necessary to provide this element. And then the final element that I wanted to talk about, which I think is extremely important, is that image with the ping pong table. But behind that ping pong table, you could see lighting. And lighting is really that final key ingredient, placemaking ingredient. We have found that overhead festoon lights are ways to add a little bit of pixie dust to your street. You could either span those lights over your street right of way, or they could be wrapped, on the trees, but they really are an inexpensive element that we have been including in our projects. They have been on a number of main streets, and they really provide a sense of warmth, festiveness, hominess. They really make people feel welcome, and they really indicate that people have arrived in a destination. So lighting can be provided in festoon lighting, but it could also be provided through more traditional styles of lighting, like through streetlights and uplighting.
Thanks, Shannon. I think Albuquerque has something very similar to that center image of the shade in their central plaza, which is really beautiful. Okay, thank you for that. And so I'm just going to talk about, after working in placemaking for 20 years and corridor revitalization, there are a couple of big trends that we were working through up until COVID that I want to just talk about and how they influence our thinking. The first one is reallocating street space away from cars and towards people and other modes of transportation. The idea of alternative mobility, the importance of culture, art, and program, and Shannon's already touched upon that. And then I want to go through a case study that we were working on recently. So reallocating public space, and this is just a trend. After building our cities all around the car and automobile and taking away places for people, we've been working on the idea of reallocating some of that space back to people. So some of the tactics of that are road diets, sidewalk widening, chicanes, which I'll talk about, parklets, streetlets. Shannon mentioned streetlets, parking lot plazas, and alleys. So sidewalk widening and chicanes are ideas of actually taking roadway and giving it back to pedestrians. So a couple of images of how that could be done on the left. On the right is a chicane, which is basically taking what might be a straight street and winding it through and giving some of that space back to pedestrians, but also making the path of travel for cars a little bit more windy. That will slow cars down. The idea of some of this is not only to create more space for people, but also slow car traffic so people and cars can coexist in a better way. And we've started to see that being employed in a lot of cities as a way of keeping car traffic, but actually slowing it down. Another tactic we've seen a lot is parklets. And we've done a lot of parklets. And what's interesting about this is I talked about street widening. There is a main street in Long Beach where we work, which was called Retro Row. And it was a really fantastic little independent street front of vintage stores and unique galleries. But the sidewalks were incredibly narrow. So we came up with a plan to widen the sidewalks, similar to some of the images I showed earlier, to create more room for pedestrians. And after working through that plan with the city and the Public Works Department, it became clear that city wasn't going to let us do that. So the business owners on the street said, well, what can we do? What innovative ways can we create a more people-centered space and also slow down car traffic? And what came about with that is to introduce this idea of parklets. And it was an idea that we had seen in San Francisco, where they took a parking space away and created an outdoor plaza or a small little park, a parklet. And we implemented that as a pilot project in the city of Long Beach. It was the first one that was done in Southern California after importing it from Northern California. And it was extremely successful. The first few parklets we did, 2 for restaurants. The way that worked, and there's many different ways to implement a parklet program, but the way this program worked is that a city would apply for the parklet. They would pay what would be similar to a outdoor dining fee and license for a year. And then they would pay for the parklet improvements. And almost all the parklets we started with were restaurants. You can see one on the upper left called Garcia's, where we took 1 or 2 cars, built out a platform, seating, barricades to make it safe. And the costs range, between $15,000 to $25,000. But the restaurants that wanted to do this paid for it, and they saw so many benefits. They immediately increased the size of their dining area. They created so much visibility that really attracted people, because when people see other people, they're attracted to that. And most of the businesses we talked to after implementing this program saw increases in sales from like 20 to 50%. So they became very, very popular. And we've implemented dozens and dozens of parklets throughout Southern California as a result of that, and seen cities implement parklet programs to really make the process fairly smooth. Even though most of them have been around restaurants, the image on the right is actually a fitness parklet that we did near our office. It's basically an outdoor gym as an extension of a small little independent gym on one of our main streets. And this particular owner didn't have a lot of money to build a parklet, but we were able to give her the design and construction drawings pro bono. A local contractor built it at cost, and she was able to crowdsource the money for the equipment. So it was really successful and a lot of fun. Pre-COVID, it's not being used right now, but hopefully it will come back. And it was a really great way of creating energy and activity for the main street.
Alan, I just want to mention, going back to parklets, I'm going to drop in our Studio 111 Long Beach parklet study. It does have a lot of that data that you presented, and perhaps it could be useful to people attending this webinar.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then as Shannon mentioned, coming from the idea of parklets or streetlets, the idea of taking some side streets or smaller streets and turning them into people plazas. This is an image from the city of Los Angeles, which created a program called People Streets. And in that program, community organizations can apply to close a street, build a parklet, or do some other pedestrian improvements to improve the viability and the attractiveness of their neighborhood streets. And so as long as they comply with certain design guidelines, use certain furniture, use certain paint and colors, they are able to apply for that and make it a pretty seamless process. So we see the rise of streetlets. This is another image. This is also from the city of Long Beach, showing a plan of how along the main street, and that's the main street that's running along the top of the page. There's a small little section of street that the city proposed to close to create a streetlet and to have dining and other uses spill out into that. So that's another tool that we've seen start to be employed to, again, take some space away from cars and give it back to people and other mobility elements. Another trend that Shannon and I have been looking at a lot is parking lot plazas. And this is taking parking lots, which may not be always occupied, and being able to really create some people spaces along there. This is a plan that we have worked on for a couple of years. We started it pre-COVID, and it's finally getting constructed right now. That was turning a disused vacant lot into a community parking lot on the main street of a small little town called Lomita in LA County. But not just making it a parking lot, but also making it somewhat of a gathering space so that there could be some community events. You could pull in food trucks. There could be some seating in a street that really didn't have any public space that was usable. And so we saw the potential of using parking lots, multi-using parking lots for many different kind of events as a way of, again, creating people space on main streets. Do you want to add something to that, Shannon?
No, I think that was a really good explanation. Again, kind of going back to like that placemaking ingredients, this really kind of hits all of them. Lighting, involving a local artist for a mural, ways to activate a space through programming by bringing in food trucks, providing different types of seating options. So this was a really, fun project. I think the lot was what, 5,000 square feet. It's pretty tiny. But the city of Lomita was able to get the property from a county defaulted property. I think that was kind of the backstory on it, but it was just one of those opportunities where this lot was sitting there vacant. And we had completed a study for the city for their downtown revitalization plan and found that there was much of a need for more food and beverage uses. And so we thought that through this parking lot activation, the food trucks could, provide some of that.
Thanks. And then another trend is alleys, cities rediscovering their alleys. Alleys were built mostly in cities to facilitate, loading and services. But cities are finding that they also could be really fantastic people spaces. This is an alley that we renovated in the city of San Pedro with a big community-based mural, local artist. And we've been looking at alleys in so many cities as ways of promoting interesting spaces, different ways of moving around cities, and also economic vitality, because alleys sometimes are the most interesting places in cities, and you can open stores into them. They could be dining. They really have an untapped potential in many, many, many towns. Another trend we've been really seeing as part of placemaking and really interesting is alternative mobility. So I'm showing you some pictures. When we talk about alternative mobility, there's a lot of different factors here. One is just active transportation. So that's walking, biking, rolling, really different ways of getting around. And many cities have implemented bike lanes or multi-use trails in their downtowns to really promote other ways of getting around besides just the car or walking. And that's also including bike lanes. Another trend that was really a very controversial and challenging topic for a lot of towns was on the lower left, micromobility, the rise of scooters. It was both great. It created a more environmentally sustainable way of getting around, and it was extremely popular, but also created a lot of problems, especially on main streets. And we saw a lot of towns struggling with how to allow micromobility, but also deal with the problems of it, because it was created a lot of chaos on main streets, safety issues, And just general, it was very challenging for a lot of cities of how to control and govern how those worked. There's also shared mobility, the rise of Uber and Lyft and other ways of getting around, especially in entertainment districts, that we thought was really important in how it might change how we looked at parking or the curb, and whether the curb would just be for parked cars or whether the curb also had to accommodate drop off and pickup of a lot of shared mobility. And along with that, there was, especially pre-COVID, a lot of discussion about autonomous vehicles and whether we would have automatic robot cars driving around our downtowns, picking people up and dropping people off, and whether we would not need to have any more parking or really rethink how people would use mobility as a service rather than as an ownership model. That talk is still out there, certainly not as big a topic as it was, but I think still it's out there whether autonomous vehicles will really think and change the way people will get mobility around cities. When you talk about mobility, it also brings up a lot of issues around access and equity. So we had a talk with one city about really increasing active transportation, bike lanes, reducing parking. And there was a lot of interesting discussion from accessibility experts that said that that's great for active people, but there are many people that have accessibility issues and mobility challenges that really need to be able to drive up to a destination, need to have very convenient parking. And you cannot forget about those different needs. And I think the following presentation by Joni Palmer will talk about accessibility and access and equity. And I think that's going to be a great segue from our presentation to that, because it really is important in creating a vibrant Main Street. And lastly, I'll just spend a minute on this, just art, culture, and program. We talked about it a lot, just some of the images of projects we've worked on, how art has become such an important economic revitalization strategy and a placemaking strategy. And it's not just murals on buildings or, as you see on the lower left, murals on the ground that really activate the ground plane, but it's also events, farmers markets, community events, cultural events, art events that really help create dynamic, vibrant places. So those are just some of the trends that we were seeing, we were engaged in. And I want to kind of give a case study of a project that we've been working on, which we thought was great because it threaded all of these different aspects together. We were really excited about this project. This was in the city of Glendale, a mid-sized city in Los Angeles that had a very vibrant downtown, but it had an arts and entertainment district that wasn't vibrant, that was actually kind of dead. The roads were used, and these are some images of how it was and how it still is, frankly, when we started the project, where the roads really were used for utility or access into parking structures and really didn't have any of the activity that the city was ultimately hoping for. It wasn't really fostering the independent art feeling that it wanted. There was a bunch of theaters and other destinations nearby, but the street itself really wasn't very active. So they engaged us in a large placemaking effort to really revitalize this 2-block stretch, a street called Artsack Avenue. And it was a very important street to them. Glendale has a very large Armenian community, and they renamed the street Artsack because it represents a region that's very dear culturally to Armenian Americans. So we started with this process, and our process was to work with the city council that really wanted to control the project, to create goals and set goals and parameters for the project. And then we launched into a very large outreach effort with both the stakeholders, being the businesses and property owners along the street, as well as the business improvement district that had some governance on the street, and then with the community. And we we created a vacant storefront design center so people could come in and learn about the project and interact with ideas about what they would like to see, as well as a large community event with dancers and food trucks. and just was one of the most successful events the city put on in terms of engagement, and also just activating the street. It's called Activate Artsock. And once we had all of this input, we were able to ideate some ideas around activating the alley that was adjacent, bringing in art, and working with the Cultural Affairs Department on a public art program and how that would work and the parameters of that. And then physical improvements to the street to really facilitate more engagement, less cars, and more people spaces. And we came up with what we thought was a really beautiful plan that really created some really fantastic spaces, a governance plan, an art program. We were really excited about the project, and we had put together some really fantastic images, and then we were deeply into construction documents. About 50% through it, we were pricing it, and we thought this was going to be just this amazing project that was a culmination of so many placemaking trends and so much placemaking excitement that we had. And we were wrapping up our working drawings in March of last year, and then that happened. So a lot of things changed at that point. This project went on hold. In fact, most of our work went on hold. We had very little things going on because the world went into pandemic mode, and we had to pivot. We had to pivot to how can we use a lot of the things we learned about placemaking to help revive our main streets, or at least sustain them through this pandemic and come out the other side. And so that's when we worked into our COVID response, and we're going to talk a little bit about our process through that.
Yeah, so I could pick it up from here. Thank you, that was great. So many of the placemaking initiatives that Alan just presented also, we found, apply during the COVID pandemic. However, the strategies are being implemented differently. We're being more nimble, and they're being implemented in a temporary manner as opposed to a permanent manner. And one thing that I wanted to note is that we have found that there's new needs and priorities that are driving our Main Street placemaking decisions. And these new needs and priorities are access to public space and increasing the amount of public space as a means to improve community health and well-being. During this, pandemic, there is more of an importance now placed on access to nature and public space than there ever has been before. And what we have found is that COVID really has reframed our definition in thinking what public space is, or what we define it as. And we've gotten really creative with that definition during this pandemic. We are now opening it up, our definition up of public space to include our streets, bike paths, sidewalks, rooftops, vacant lots like that Lomita lot we had just presented, or even the tops of parking garages. I've seen, on some main streets, they have the top of the parking garage is used for like a drive-in movie theater. The second need or priority that we have really seen during this COVID pandemic is the need for economic survival for Main Street local businesses. And we have helped to achieve this through programs like Alfresco dining, flex zones, and designated curbside zones for retail pickup. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about those as well. And then I think doing both of these, achieving both of these needs and priorities, keeping in mind that there are social distancing protocols in place, and making sure that we are meeting the needs by also making sure that residents and community members and customers are safe. And then the other thing or challenge that we've seen in kind of our placemaking strategies during COVID is that we have to work with very tight resources and with limited budgets. And we certainly had to do that before, but I think more so even now. And so we've had to get pretty creative in where we pull materials from to activate main streets in different ways. So Alan, if you want to just switch the slide. Okay, thank you. So the first thing I want to talk about is this Flexzone concept. And this is something that we had actually launched in May of 2020. And one of the main ways that we've been repurposing public space on our main streets during this pandemic is really utilizing that existing curbside parking lane to meet the needs of existing businesses. What we actually found last May is that no one was really driving. And so that lane was really prime real estate to be repurposed for a higher and better use. So we actually created this Flexzone Demo in the early months of the pandemic. We collaborated with the Downtown Long Beach Business Alliance. That's our Downtown Long Beach bid. We worked with Public Works and we piloted this Flexzone concept, which actually evolved into this whole alfresco dining movement that you see on some main streets today. So there's a few things I just wanted to note with our Flexzone concept. It had three main components. To the right of this image, we wanted to make sure that it had a safe area, a safe waiting area for customers. So that was a safe area for customers either waiting to enter into a retail establishment or even waiting to place an order for food. Our curbside, we also had a curbside pickup and drop-off zone, and that's again for customers either picking up retail or picking up food. And then we also had a location for outdoor dining as part of our Flexzone. And then Alan, did you want to go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So one of the fun things about our Flexzone concept is we actually had the opportunity to demo it as a proof of concept during the early stages of the pandemic. And this is where we got really scrappy and resourceful. We worked with a local printer to create social distancing decals for customers waiting to enter the retail establishments. Those are the black decals with like the citrus design at the lower left side of the screen. We also printed temporary signage to kind of designate our curbside pickup area. We also pulled together resources such as tables and chairs from local businesses, some turf, AstroTurf that we had as part of our toolkit, some plants from Home Depot, umbrellas, and even traffic zones from Public Works to create this whole outdoor dining experience. And this demo was done in a very cost-effective manner. I think it was about a couple $100 for the signage and printing, and it really had a big impact on Pine Street, which is the main street in Long Beach. And then here is just, another image of us going out and laying those improvements in the street. This was, because this was a demo, it was a temporary intervention. It was, I think, up for a full day, but it really, again, was that proof of concept to make cities more flexible and open to concepts like outdoor dining and alfresco. So now I'm going to talk about our alfresco dining program that we launched for the city of Glendale in summer 2020. As Alan mentioned, we were previously working with the city of Glendale on their Artsock Avenue project, and due to the pandemic, that was put on hold. But that project had a lot of ideas like chicanes and parklets as part of that design concept, and so we thought that perhaps we could use this pandemic as an opportunity to test parklets through alfresco dining. So the city actually had approached us and said that they wanted to implement 14 temporary parklets installed by the July 4th weekend. And we got this request in mid-May. So we had to be extremely quick in the turnaround. But what Studio 111 was responsible for the alfresco dining program is we were really responsible for procuring the furniture for the parklets, the tables and chairs and the umbrellas, identifying different types of plants to add, as well as any sort of decals or paint colors for these traffic construction barricades. And what the city was responsible for was they were leading the business outreach effort. They were responsible for notifying the businesses that there would be these temporary interventions in front of the businesses that were taking, their parking spaces. And so they were really responsible for that communication channel. And I can talk a little bit about that later in our lessons learned. But what we have found with programs like Alfresco Dining is this is really a multi-departmental project. We were working with the city's economic development department as our primary point of contact, but they were getting the initiative from the mayor's office. We had public works involved, helping us to lay that K-rail out. We were collaborating with Glendale's Downtown Business Association as well, because they were responsible for, chaining up the furniture at night, putting away the umbrellas. And so it really was a collaborative effort to make this program successful. And one of the things that I just wanted to mention is that I think Alfresco Dining has really been the silver lining to this pandemic. These parklets have greatly contributed to street life and vibrancy on our main streets. And I feel like everyone has, certainly benefited, whether it is a resident and you have the opportunity to enjoy a restaurant experience again, even if it's outdoors, or a community member just to take a stroll and see people outside, or even the restaurant itself. I found that the importance of community is or has been reinforced more during this pandemic, as well as a desire to support local business. So Alan, do you want to go to the?
Yeah, and I was going to mention, Shannon, too, when we were after we did our Long Beach demonstration project, there was a lot of press around that. We had a lot of newspaper articles and TV articles about what we were trying to do. And I used that very hard to talk to our client in Glendale after that other project had stopped, saying, we need to help you get back on your feet. And there was that feeling, I think, driven a lot of helplessness, that we didn't know what we could do. And we thought, let's just try something. And they brought that to the council office in Glendale, and then came up with this idea of the Alfresco program using K-rail and other at-hand means to really quickly mobilize and put in some outdoor dining parklets that were safe. They were one of the first cities to really do it at scale. And so these are a couple of pictures. Do you want to talk about these, Shannon?
Yeah, well, I was just going to maybe talk about some of the successes from the Alfresco Dining program. So there were 14 original parklets, but the program was extremely successful in providing, vital space for restaurants to stay open and function. This is along Brand Boulevard, these images, or some of the images, and some are on another main street in the Montrose community in Glendale. But I think what the city has found is kind of this unprecedented demand for alfresco dining, especially during this pandemic. And so they've expanded their original pilot program. They have, I think, about 5 or 6 more of these temporary parklets in place. There are conversations right now on, like, after this is all over, what stays and what goes, because these have been so successful, because motorists have adapted to these, new roadway configurations, because people have perhaps adapted to maybe not parking directly in front of a business, but parking in an adjacent structure or in an adjacent public lot. Like, what are we going to keep in place? So I think those conversations will be really interesting moving forward. And then
a couple more pictures.
Yeah, a couple more pictures of.
Again, we spent a lot. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we were really scrappy with this. The traffic barricades that you see are those white construction K-rail that you see on any construction site, and we figured out a way to make that look somewhat beautiful by painting it a really splashy, vibrant color, by painting a pattern on it, by getting, decals printed that advertise Glendale's Alfresco program. So we had to get really creative.
Yeah, I was going to say that was really, there was a lot of work to do. It was one of the more challenging projects I think I've ever done, because again, we got the task order to move forward in May, and they wanted them open in July, by July 4th weekend. It sounds like enough time, but it wasn't. necessarily. We had to work really fast. The city was going to use these K-rails, and I told them that the K-rails won't look very good. They may look more like you've created barricades against businesses versus something that attracts people. So we're going to have to dress them up. And when they came out, our client, Economic Development, realized what we were talking about. They looked really horrible. They had graffiti on them. They were beat up. They were dirty. So we had to come up with a way of dressing them up so they really would appeal to people coming back out. That the idea is to make it feel comfortable and safe and also attractive to be out. And these are cities that the city really cares about its appearance. So we had first come up with the idea of putting vinyl graphics on all of them. We saw some precedents of that, but they had so many and they were so long, hundreds of feet long, that we ran out of money very quickly with the vinyl graphics. So we came up with the idea of a smaller vinyl graphic with the Alfresco logo, and then painting the rest of it. We did blue on Brand Avenue and we did green on Montrose. And that was just, took a little while to figure out, but we were able to get that system down. We were trying to get an artist to do some murals on them, but that from a time standpoint and a procurement standpoint was a little bit of a challenge. We had to find furniture that we thought would be durable because the city was providing furniture, durable, but had to be very affordable and it had to be in stock. And that actually turned out during the pandemic to be a problem because there weren't a lot of shipments going out. So we had to research and research and research. We finally found some furniture we were really happy with, that the stores are really happy with. And then we used the Public Works Department to go to local nurseries and their own city yard to just put in trees and plants and pots and really dress it up a little bit. And then each of those individual businesses added on to what the city provided to really customize and make them really pleasant places. They're now being winterized with tent-like structures and heaters so that they can work throughout the winter. That's a big issue. You know, we're in Southern California, so weather isn't really so much of an issue for us as it is in other parts of the country. But it still does rain, it does get cold, it's hot in the summer, and Glendale gets extremely hot. So there was a lot of thought about how do you weatherize it so it works during different seasons. But the outcomes have been really spectacular. The city's extremely happy. It's been a really big success for the city. They feel like they've done something that really helps their businesses survive. And it's been really important to a lot of businesses that have made it through, struggled through, but made it through. One more image here. This is when we had a big budget. We could put a big logo and vinyl graphic throughout the whole thing. So I think that's really been a great case study for a COVID response at a pretty large scale in the city.
Yeah, and the last thing that I wanted to talk about was this concept of open streets. And I think what we have found during the pandemic is that public space now has the ability to be temporary and mobile. So whether it's pop-up infrastructure like, you know, the temporary parklets that we've showed you as part of an alfresco dining program, or even this concept of play or open streets, where we temporarily close down a street to vehicular traffic for other uses. These are more opportunities to provide public space to different areas or streets within a community. Perhaps it doesn't make sense on, you know, some of the highly trafficked streets, but perhaps an adjacent street. And there are a couple different types of open streets. Open streets are either a partial closure, so closing one or two travel lanes, or even a full closure where you close the entire street. And we're seeing these full closures quite a bit in downtown districts and on portions of a main street. And what we have found is that this open street concept really has created more opportunities for outdoor activities, for walking and biking, and provided more opportunities for outdoor dining as well. And a lot of cities like the city of Laguna Beach, like the city of Huntington Beach, where they have actually they've had a temporary full closure as part of the pandemic, they're actually studying their main street now to make some of those temporary full closures actually permanent because they've been so successful. And then here are, this is actually from the city of Long Beach when they were talking about their Open Streets program. They actually pulled some of our Flexzone imagery to showcase what they meant by a partial closure in a flex zone.
And that kind of evolved into this, which is what the full closure ended up being. And it was highly successful, maybe during the pandemic, too successful.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of pent-up demand for people to go back out and eat. This is you could see all the COVID signs. This is during the height of the pandemic, but so one of the issues was they closed the street and they allowed dining to spill out, and it really did make the restaurants and do well. They had some particular rules about it, but it turned out to be very hard to govern. Once you let the genie out of the bottle, people really wanted to be out and together. So there were some issues around how do you govern that, and how do you really make sure that people are still maintaining safe distances and protocols. But there was, again, successes and challenges with how that program has been implemented. You want to talk about this one, Shannon?
Yeah, again, this is kind of that, hybrid approach. This is in the city of Laguna Beach, where you could see that they had built out the infrastructure for the Alfresco dining parklets. Those are what you see behind those like wooden fences that they've, nicely built. And then I think what happened is they found that this people street that they've created was so successful that they wanted to temporarily close it off to vehicles. And I think what was really great about that is it provided an additional opportunity for restaurants to have even more seating by perhaps bringing some tables into the street. So like I had mentioned, the city of Laguna Beach is actually looking at permanently closing the street because it's been so successful.
And there was a lot of talk about this, especially when it came to having restaurants survived. I was on a panel at US Placemaking over the last year, and they called it streetery, which is like, combination of street and eat. I thought that was kind of interesting. We're going to talk about lessons learned, because our streets aren't just, well, let's put it this way. Maybe it's not so great to make our streets just outdoor food courts. But so there was a lot of discussion about the challenges between the retail businesses, the cultural businesses, and the food businesses, and how they all could coexist during some of these temporary installations. But streetery was definitely one of the topics that was talked about a lot during the presentation, during the pandemic. Okay, so we want to launch another poll. And we're asking what has your street or community or organization tried, if any, during the pandemic as a response? And if you have some other ideas, please use the chat.
Sure.
Let some other people kind of
Some of
respond.
the other votes are designated food pickup spots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've actually seen that used as well. Expanded patio spaces. I mean, I've seen that in Glendale as well, where the surface parking lot is now turned into kind of this outdoor dining experience with, a tent, string lights, seating. So that has been, really great as well.
So it seems like, yeah, definitely a lot of the things we talked about have been used. Open streets, pop-up events, parklets. Great. And all the others. Fantastic. Thank you. Look forward to talking about that a little bit later. Okay.
So we wanted to use the next part of the presentation to talk about some lessons learned from this experience. Mostly it's going to talk about our lessons learned during the pandemic, but I feel like what we have learned during the pandemic is there's really been this kind of opportunity to test ideas, and perhaps that could still continue after the pandemic through like a pilot project. So one of the first lessons learned is to be resourceful. And I think finding for each of our temporary interventions, we had to certainly get creative with where materials were coming from or where resources were coming from. And for most of our alfresco dining efforts, they all kind of needed similar components. We needed some sort of protective barricade, protecting people in those spaces from vehicles if those streets were, you know, partial closures. And so Alan talked a little bit about adapting concrete K-rail and beautifying it with, you know, vinyl graphics or even painting it, or this is really an opportunity to involve the artist community in painting murals on K-rail. The other thing that we've seen is a lot of public works departments had these like very large orange or red water-filled barricades. And what I've been seeing is some businesses are actually covering those in plywood and they're painting them, you know, vibrant colors. And so that's just kind of a way to take what's needed and what currently exists and opportunities to beautify it. The other thing that is another component of these alfresco spaces are seating and shade. So this includes umbrellas, or in the winter, tents and heat lamps. In the case of Glendale, the city provided these to businesses. A lot of the restaurants on some of these main streets had built-in furniture, like different seating booths. And so that furniture wasn't able to be, you know, taken outside as easily. And so the city of Glendale did provide that furniture. But we have found is that local businesses are also providing that outdoor seating. And this is kind of a way where they could make those spaces their own. And the other resourceful element that we've really seen is ways to use landscape to make these spaces feel a little bit more comfortable. So whether it is, you know, collaborating with a public works department to provide us with trees as a temporary home that will then be planted as part of another project, whether it's going to Home Depot and purchasing, you know, flowers or kind of taller plants to serve as a kind of a visually pleasant green wall. Those, you know, that's another strategy that we've seen with being resourceful. Alan, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, that's good.
Okay. The other thing that I want to mention is just getting something in the ground. It doesn't have to be perfect, and refining it later. I think during this whole pandemic, we've been able to get away with a lot when you tell people it's temporary, when you tell people it's up for 90 days. I think people are certainly a lot more tolerant of that if they know it's temporary. And so one of the things that we had to do for Glendale is we just had to get the parklets out there, and we were able to adjust them by shrinking them in size or expanding them based on the need of the business or the, you know, traffic patterns on that street. So Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, just get something in the ground and you can beautify it later. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is that this is a great opportunity to test and innovate. The concept of a parklet or alfresco dining or even an open street has been around for years. COVID has just really been the boost to making these public space initiatives more mainstream. It's really allowed cities that have heard of these concepts to actually test them out during the pandemic. And I would hope that many of the alfresco parklets that have been successful during COVID could potentially become more permanent elements of the street in the future. And then the last lesson that I learned that I want to talk about is this multi-agency and departmental collaboration is essential. And what we have seen during this pandemic is that the barriers to creating public space have dramatically dropped or have been temporarily suspended. During this pandemic, processes have been radically simplified and streamlined, like permitting and approvals, making public space more possible than ever before. So what's really been altered during the pandemic is the implementation of public space. It's happening really fast. And certainly there is an unprecedented demand for it, which is what I had mentioned, but I think it's certainly being more of a priority in conversations right now. For a while, parklets, cities were so hesitant to implement parklets because there was that conversation of parking and public space, and which really, kind of parking previously would win that argument. And so I think right now, public space is finally taking more of a priority in conversations, especially on the main street.
And also just balancing, the thing we're learning is balancing, we say restaurant and retail needs, but they're more than that, balancing all the stakeholder needs. So when you implement a program and you get buy-in, not everyone participates in the process of buy-in or heard about the communications about what's going to be implemented. And there might be issues around that. And so we have to be able to understand that people will want adjustments. And there has to be, in any kind of public space, a balancing of the different stakeholder needs. So some of the images here are Shannon doing a tactical demonstration project and being very scrappy with materials to really create a temporary plaza. We talked about multi-departmental coordination. These are those barricades that many cities have that can be used and deployed to create safe temporary parklets, then maybe decorated to make them attractive for visitors. Guidelines and process is such an important part of really, we can talk a little bit about this in our sort of looking forward section coming up, but really understanding the process, and that again is all part of an interdepartmental process of making sure all the different stakeholders and all the different jurisdictions and bodies are coordinated and talked to, communicated with when rolling out any kind of public street process, especially one that's done as a pilot very quickly. And then here's an article that I think just talks about the challenges. I was showing you Pine Avenue where we did our initial very first demonstration project, a test of the Flex Street, and then the implementation closed the whole street. And that became really a problem for a lot of the businesses that required pickup, delivery, where their customers weren't going to walk a block to their store. And so the city had to refine the plans and make some changes so there could be some car access at certain times or certain very designated delivery and pickup areas. Do you want to just go through some of these lessons, Shannon?
Yeah, I think the one thing I wanted to highlight of this, well, actually there's kind of a few things that I want to highlight on this list. I think the first thing is because these projects have actually moved so quickly, there hasn't been sufficient community outreach, or there wasn't initially. I think cities have been able to course correct since then by launching, public surveys to get like business owner feedback on the benefits of the Alfresco program. But I think with, all public or all projects that go within the public right of way, there does need to be some sort of proper noticing to community members, letting them know that the existing configuration of a street's going to change, that, a parklet may be being located in front of their favorite business. So that's one of the things that cities have been able to kind of course correct in making sure that they're getting the word out about some of these temporary infrastructure improvements. But I think initially cities were just in such response mode that they were just trying to get this stuff out there as quickly as possible. So I think communication in any sort of Alfresco program is really critical. That communication saying it's temporary, that communication saying that there are opportunities for these to be, refined and adjusted, but over time, I think we found that that was really important. I think the other thing that we have, seen is that many cities launch their Alfresco programs with equity targets in mind. Whether it was targeting minority owned businesses, or whether having these programs, wanting to expand these programs to severely impacted areas. But one of the challenges that we've seen with those severely impacted areas with low income communities is that these communities and these main streets actually do lack the infrastructure needed for these programs. So some of those communities lack sidewalks, so they couldn't provide outdoor dining, or though they had streets where their traffic speeds were too high and it wasn't safe to do a parklet. So I think what cities have found during this pandemic is in order to deploy these programs in severely impacted communities, actually more resources and more city budget is needed than in communities that have this infrastructure in place already. So that was, another lesson learned.
Great. And then kind of just to wrap everything up, just a little bit of discussion about future thoughts and trends. A couple of things that we're thinking of. No one has a crystal ball, so we don't know where we're all going as we get out of the pandemic mode and get into the recovery mode. But some of the things that we've seen that have been interesting to us is people have learned to live in their neighborhood, to really maybe revisit their main street and use their main street as a place of community when they've been in lockdown. This is an article by Roberta Brand-Gratz, who talked about the rise of the rebirth of the regional city, the smaller town, the place where there's a quite good quality of life that you don't find necessarily in big cities. We live in a very expensive area, Southern California, and we've seen a lot of our employees leave and go to smaller towns in different states. They're still going to work for us because now they can work from anywhere the way we work. But we see the rise of smaller towns being really great destinations, and hopefully that will help make Main Streets viable again, revitalize the Main Street. We talked about something called the 15-minute city. This is a concept that's been talked a lot about during the pandemic, but it evolved even before that. The idea that you can create a community where everything you need is within a 15-minute walk or 10-minute drive. And the idea of small town or mid-sized town really providing all of your needs is interesting. And it's certainly a very interesting topic that we think will play out post-pandemic and help revitalize and sustain our small town main streets and some of our larger town main streets as well. There'll definitely be a lot of changes in store in that regard. There's also a focus on equitable outcomes of our public spaces. Not only did we go through this pandemic during this time, but let's remember we also had some of the greatest social unrest and challenges that we've faced recently. And that has played a big part in thinking about how do we make sure that our public spaces serve everyone, that they're open, accessible to everyone. And certainly we talked a little bit about the different stakeholders, but the broader community, does it feel welcome in our spaces that we create? And we think that the goal there is, again, communication, outreach, and making sure that all voices are heard and all voices have a vehicle to express their opinions. And I think that the following presentation will talk about that as well. What will stay and what will, from this pandemic, what will continue, what will change, where are we? This little diagram, we're past rapid solutions. We're kind of towards sustained success. Maybe the post-vaccine era is coming. We're really excited about that. What we're hoping is that there've been a lot of relaxation about process and policy and how things can be facilitated to let experimentation, to let entrepreneurs do their thing on main streets. That's been released during some of the sort of hall pass during the pandemic. And what we've been advocating when cities ask, what can we do, is keep that openness to try out and experiment and pilot new things in any kind of post-pandemic scenario, so that our streets can evolve the way they need to for success. And then lastly, I think it's always important to just remember guiding principles. This is a chart that I found on Happy City, which is another really cool website resource for urbanism. And thinking about what our main streets can be, and after this pandemic, what they could strive to be in terms of health, meaning for communities, the sense of belonging for people, how we can build resilience for future challenges, sociability, ease of use, and joy, which is, I think, what we're all about. Again, returning to the idea of what placemaking is about, creating happiness. So I think we've talked a lot. I hope that you found some of it interesting. Maybe there's some questions in the chat. I put our email addresses here at the bottom in case you want to email one of us with a follow-up question. Please feel free to do so.
Thank you, guys. Really great. I've been taking for questions, so I've got a few here. We'll get to as many as we can, but that was very inspirational and very timely. So thank you, Alan, and thank you, Shannon. I think a really good question that was asked is the strategies to help envision change. A lot of times these are hard to communicate to municipalities or stakeholders, and some of these are, they might be perceived as quite drastic, right? So how would you answer that? How would you strategize to envision change, to communicate these ideas?
Well, I'm going to have Shannon answer that, but I'll give her one of the things we do a lot is this idea of, we'll call it tactile urbanism or demonstration projects, but we've been involved in a project going from city to city with a large regional planning organization to demonstrate going into cities, finding out some of the issues that the city wants to explore in terms of placemaking, and then demonstrate it with a one-day kind of festival. Do you want to talk about that, Shannon?
Yeah, so we've actually been involved in a lot of tactical urbanism initiatives. That's kind of what we call it, where we, to envision change, to actually show people the potential of their street or public space, we have this thing called experiential outreach. So we will go and, with duct tape or with spray chalk, build a temporary bike lane for the day and invite the community out as part of a event where they could go and experience how that bike lane improves their mobility, how it enhances the street when the right-of-way is configured where the vehicle is not the priority. So one of the ways that we help with envisioning change is certainly through experiential outreach. It's certainly through education as well. So it's important to talk to the community about the potential for how the right-of-way could be reallocated because I think what they, see is they think it's just for cars. But so it's, talking to them about different types of bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure that's possible. So more high visibility or creative crosswalks, protected bike lanes. I think even through this whole Alfresco movement, showing them that parking and the car is not king or everything. I think, but truly just that experiential outreach where here's our idea, and for people, not everyone could read a plan, that's not necessarily effective. So experiential outreach has really been critical.
And I think also just going to our philosophy of small incremental improvements, I think some of the best public space improvements happen with what we'll call a dress rehearsal, where it is really done in a very tactical way with paint and pots and things that could be removed to give the community a sense that this may seem radical, but let's try it out. Let's try it on, see if it works. We can always undo it. And that gives people that sense that we're not going to invest huge resources in a change that may not work, that might seem too radical. Allow some things to happen over time. I think that those have proven to be effective in many, many cities.
One thing that I just want to quickly mention is cities have been using tactical urbanism and dress rehearsals to get funding for permanent infrastructure projects. So I think if a city could showcase this proof of concept that we've tested it, that the community buys into it, with photos, even as part of a grant application, agencies like state agencies are more willing to fund those projects because they've already been tested within the right of way and they have a certain amount of community buy-in. So it's really a funding strategy as well.
Yeah, great, thank you. We're a little over, but I'll ask final question, one question. This might be unique to New Mexico, but a lot of our main streets, they're actually state highways that go right through the middle of our towns. And our DOT is a little conservative, so they are changing slowly, and we're able to do innovative things. But working with the DOT, I guess it probably happens in California as well for yourself. Things like if we have two-way traffic, converting that to maybe one-way, where it's a compromise of getting some activity in the street, but still allowing cars to travel through. Are there any strategies that you could recommend, or has this happened where you've had success this way?
Yeah, we actually have Caltrans in California, which is kind of this probably very similar to your state agency, where they don't really like to touch the roadway at all. A couple of projects that I've worked on have included tactical demonstrations where Caltrans has been part of those projects. So I think it's involving those state agencies early on. We usually have a technical advisory committee where we bring all of the entities together to talk about a project and what's possible on a state designated highway. So they are a partner in that. I do think though that sometimes it's almost best to avoid putting improvements on a highly trafficked freeway, especially because we're always looking at safety being a critical, factor, and we want to make these spaces safe for people. And so perhaps on those right-of-ways, perhaps it's best to utilize a surface parking lot or a vacant lot, or different working within what you have to create these spaces for people instead of trying to, put them within a heavily trafficked highway. Alan, do you want to add to that?
No, I think engaging and the technical advisory, the TAC as we call it, is a very important part of any kind of public space, and involving state agencies. Like Shannon said, our DOT is equally conservative, but I also think it's changing. And I think that they are understanding that they have to evolve with the needs of cities, and hopefully you can continue to advocate for them to be flexible and do things that will help main streets survive and flourish.
Yeah.
Great. Shannon, Alan, thank you so much. I feel very fortunate to have you here. I'll never look at a K-rail again the same. I never thought you could do something actually beautiful with them. So Thank you guys very much. And we'll put your emails up, so if anybody has any questions, they can reach out further.
Thank you.
Yeah,
you guys.
thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with all you.
Yes, it was great.
Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Bye.